Wafube. This is Misal Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, coming at you once again with another Simon Necronomicon lesson. And I want to give all praises and honors to Santa Muerte before we begin the video, respectfully. And today we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is DNA and occult science. And before we begin, I would like to define occult science as anyone involved in, shamanic arts, alchemy, metaphysics, some of the indigenous rites, some of the African traditional religions, many of the shamanic paths, pagan paths, and the like, and also, of course, the paths of the craft. And why I thought this video would be good is because there's a lot of talk now in the news or in the past few months about race relations and things of that nature. And I think that for the first time in American history, because right now the world of occult science is probably at its height of awareness, where we see it in movies, television, and in different stages in European history or in history abroad in Africa and other places like Russia and stuff, there may have been heights at different periods of time when dealing with occult science. But here in America, this is the first time that occult science has been so prevalent. And, usually things in the news mean something. You know what I'm saying? And so at this point in time in man's history, not only are people becoming more aware of a certain knowledge that was lost, but it may also affect their perspective on race relations. Let's just say that. Now, as far as DNA is concerned, in the occult tradition, because we definitely want to separate what is taught to the herd of the masses who are blind of their, just the knowledge, their inner self, the universe, what they, what the potential could possibly be, how far they can get in life. Like, we just don't even want to, we don't want to fall under that umbrella of ignorance. You know what I'm saying? So, however, when we're coming into the knowledge of our true self, it's a shedding process. So there's things that we pick up and learn along the way. And so I thought this video would be very much innovative in the sense that it will discuss a lot of true information that has been lost, a true perspective that has been lost, that needs to be reiterated in the occult world. Now, there's a good discussion about DNA, this very brief, in the introductory notes of the Simon Necronomicon. And I want to share my screen to share that with everyone, individuals. Hold on one second. Okay. And Simon touches on it differently, where he talks about the dragon currents, and he links that with the DNA. And he mentions earlier on that the goddess of the witches is Inanna, and also Tiamat, which is the telluric current that's raised in ritual. And we're going to talk about that in relationship to the Western Hemisphere and different things of that nature. But first, I want to make a discussion. I want to read the passage, which is in the second paragraph under the title, Worship of the Ancient Ones in History. In the middle of the paragraph, he says, however, in China, there did not seem to be a backlash of fear or resentment against this force. He's talking about the dragon force, as was known in Europe and Palestine. And the symbol of might and kingship in China is still the dragon. In the West, the conjuration, cultivation, or worship of this power was strenuously opposed with the advent of the solar monotheistic religions, and those who cling to the old ways was effectively extinguished. The wholesale slaughter of those called witches during the Inquisition is an example of this, as well as the solemn and twisted, that is to say, the purposeless and unenlightened celibacy that the church espoused. For the all-gone Wilhelm Reich is just as much Leviathan as the Kundalini of the Tantric adepts and the power raised by witches. It has always, at least in the past 2,000 years, been associated with occultism and ostensibly the rites of evil magic or forbidden magic of the enemy and of Satan. And the twisting, the spiral formed by the serpent of the catechist and by the spinning of the galaxies is also the same Leviathan of the spiral of the biologist's code of life, DNA. So I just want to bring that up because I just want to make it clear, because when people talk about DNA, basically, as far as occult science is concerned, whether a person is aware of it or not, DNA, the discussion of it was always depicted in some way, shape, or form in allegory as a serpentine force. And it was also depicted, and valued in occult science, because as the person was evolving, they were also changing their genetic code. So this is very interesting. Now, however, because of the tint of racism in America and abroad during the colonial times, a lot of things have been misappropriated as far as the occult understanding of what DNA is and connection to our ancestors and things of that nature. First of all, let me say this. In the Simon Necronomicon, the Mad Arab identifies the Arab sign as a symbol of our race, which is, a race beyond the stars. And he's taken that directly from a book, which is, is pretty much a blueprint of the Simon Tome, which is written by W.E. Butler, and it's entitled The Magician and His Work. I don't have a copy of it laid out. I do have a print copy, and I'll bring quotes of that in later. I think I have quoted it in some of the material that appears on the blog page, Warlock Asylum International News as it's known today, and in some of the literature that I wrote in text. However, what I did want to bring out about this is that he discusses how the Greeks, this idea of race beyond the stars, he quotes the Greeks, Butler quotes the Greeks, and their perception of who they were was based on their geographical location and the stars that, shined upon them during their time of birth. In other words, before colonialism, if you were born in the land, regardless of your physical archetype, and let's say like all of us, who here born in America, we would be considered all the same people. And that's just what it is. And it still goes on today. When people were talking about, man, the attacks of 9/11, they're like, oh man, they attacked everybody. And I thought it was just a stupid statement, because the outside world looks at everybody here as American. That other stuff that we're dealing with is stuff that we're dealing with. But on an occult level, it's very important that we understand that, because we want to be in sync with the higher world, or in sync with the lower world. But in either case, DNA, its importance has a lot to do with how we evolve into our divinity. But also, very much so, it has a lot to do with understanding the symbolisms that we use, the rituals that we use, and how it affects DNA. There's a book called The Power of the Subconscious Mind. It's a brilliant book. It was written by Dr. Joseph Murphy. Brilliant book. Anybody who studies any type of science should study this book, because it talks about how the subconscious mind, and this is known, you could look it up online, how the subconscious mind creates 97% to 98% of our experience. Okay, so people know that. But what people don't know is that your physical characteristics are not passed on through your bloodline. It's passed on based on what is in the parent's subconscious mind. That's what forms the physical. People, they're just finding this out recently. You understand what I'm saying? And why I'm bringing this up, because a lot of times, you know, if someone wants to work with a deity or something, they always say like, oh man, you know, you have to respect, you know, you have to, you know, people look at someone, let's say, who's white coming into something like Ifa or, you know, Haitian Voodoo as, you know, I mean, it is a little bit not a common thing, but at the same time, it's questioned like, you know, what's going on with this person's ancestry, like this sort of thing, you know, that sort of thing. So let's take a look. I want to show the viewer the misconceptions of ancestry that are prevalent. And so as a spiritualist, you cannot have these misconceptions, otherwise it would affect your range of work and the pantheon that you work with, okay? And I'm gonna bring this all the way around so that it gets to be incessantly clear, because there's some information here that needs to be expounded upon. So let me share my screen once again. And this time, what I decided to do was, I got something beautiful for everybody here. I have a generational ancestry chart. Now, if you flow with me as I'm scrolling down, you can see that the generation is numbered. So self, of course, is 0, because that's not a generation. And then the next generation is parents. So that's the first generation, which there's 2 individuals. Okay, so this is how this works. Now, if you look, and I'm gonna show you why this is important as we're going along. As you look, we see the parents. Everyone has, the first generation is 2 parents. Everyone has 4 set of parents in the second generation. Everyone has 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and it continues to go on. Now, why, let me just show this down right here. Why is this important? Let's say a person was born in 1950. If you look all the way to the right of the chart, you can see, hey man, you know, this person's born in 1950. Okay, so now we know in American history, I don't want to exclude my European friends or African friends or African relatives and European relatives or Native American relatives or Mexican relatives out of this. If we were to take a look at a person born in 1950, knowing Americans' history of racism and, you know, just a whole bunch of human crimes that have happened over the past couple of centuries, you know, we don't really think that these people are related. But let's say, for example, let me stop sharing my screen for a second. I'll come back to it in a minute. Let's say, for example, that we find an African American and he takes a DNA test. Now, according to Henry Louis Gates, who's very famously known for his research in ancestry, I think he even conducted Oprah's ancestry, he dictates that the average African American has about 20% European ancestry. Okay, let's just say that, but let's not even go there. Let's just say 10%, because I'm in ancestry. I mean, I studied ancestry for like a decade. I've helped people, you know, one of my hobbies is genealogy. So I would say 10%. Let's just give it a fair 10%. Okay. Let's take a look at that, for example. Now I'm going to pull the chart back up and we're going to see what 10% really means, because a lot of times people get their ancestry tested like, hey, I'm 90% African. I'm African. You know what I'm saying? The 10%, oh, that ain't that much. I'm African. Like they look at it as if like their whole body is African and then the arm is just European. So since most of the body is, I'm down with this. You know what I'm saying? And it's also the same way for people who are Americans who descend from Europeans. You know what I'm saying? The same things come up. So I want us to think about that when we're looking at the ancestral chart. I'm going to share my screen again. And this is a very important thing as we bridge this into occult science. So let me take a look again. And I can see, you can see the Santa Marta has the globe. And there's a meaning. And that's part of the meaning, as we will discuss shortly. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. And this is going to be really exciting. So here we have this person born in 1950. I'm not born in 1950. I hope no one thinks that. But, you know, we just have an example of a person born in 1950. And you can see the direct ancestors that that person has as they go through the generations. Okay, so now let's go before the Americas were discovered by Europe. They were discovered by other peoples who were coming back and forth to the Americas. But before, you know, Christopher Columbus' voyages, let's go back to the year 1470 and see how many direct ancestors that this person who was born in 1950 has. Okay, so we're falling back to the year 1470. 1470. This is 20 years before Columbus took sail. This is before the Moors was banished from Spain, along with the Romani people, who were known by derogatory slur gypsies. I don't want to say that, but the Roma. Okay. Also the Jews. All these people were banished out of Europe. There was a Jewish problem, there was a gypsy problem, and then eventually later, the last problem was the Negro problem. A lot of people not aware of this, but it's very important to understand in the history, and you'll see why. As an occult scientist, as a shaman, as a pagan, why this is important. Okay, so let's go back to the year 1470. Okay, at 1470, this person is dealing with, as you can see all the way to the left, their 14th great-grandparents, 16 generations, and how many direct ancestors do they have? 65,536. Now, why this changes things is because if this quote-unquote African-American person has 10% European ancestry, although Henry Louis Gates says the average is 20%, and I would have to agree with them. But a lot of times it doesn't show out that way. But in the historical records, you begin to see that. So let's just say 10%. That means that that African-American who was born in 1950, during the year 1470, had 6,500 European direct ancestors, not aunts and uncles, but direct ancestors. Because if you have 65,000 ancestors going back to the year 1470, and your DNA test says, you know, you're 10% European, that means that that's 10% of that number. So, man, 6,500 people? How many people, how many descendants do 6,500 European ancestors have in the world today? How many descendants do they have? You see what I'm saying? And then when you look at the number 65,000, is it just African and European? You know, is it some other variations that going on out of 65,000 people? It's just something to think about, right? Here's something else that is very, very important. So we covered the number of this guy right here at 1470. If you look to the right of your screen, you can see my mouse moving over 1470. Let's go back to the time that, quote unquote, the fictional book, the fictional author, you know, a lot of times when people talk about the Necronomicon, it's as if somebody has a light bulb and says, oh, you know, that was fiction. Well, we know it's fiction. We're just talking about the alchemy, you know, in another tome that was named after it. We understand that it's fiction. You know what I'm saying? Scientists have taken over 88 fictional terms and applied them to actual academic science. The word robot is a fictional term, but no one's telling some robot manufacturer, hey, you know, that's not real. It was in a fictional book. So sometimes I think that the people saying that is like brainwashed. You know what I'm saying? But that's another story. So, but I just want to clarify that, because we know in Lovecraft's fiction, Abdul Hazard or whatever wrote the Necronomicon about the year 700, 730, I would say, AD. So let's go back to that time based on the fact that this dude was born in 1950 and find out how many direct ancestors he has. Okay. So as we're going down, we can see at the year 1750, the chart doesn't go any further, that this person has, going back 40 generations, 1 trillion. Wait, what's going on? Yes. 1,099,511,627,776 direct ancestors. Here's the thing. That's at 730, 750 AD. The world has never contained, historically, 1 trillion people. That's at 730. Can you imagine if we went back to 1 CE, how many direct ancestors a person would have? Right. So that means that everyone who's alive today is related directly, a direct ancestor to everyone who lived before 1 CE. You know what I'm saying? If this dude born in 1950 has 1 trillion direct ancestors in 750 AD, can you imagine if you went back to 1 CE during the time that's supposedly been the birth of Christ? Perhaps Jesus Christ, I remember the church, the Christian church, the first symbol was 2 fishes. Right? So perhaps Jesus Christ is a personification of all the ancestors of that era and back. Because everyone, so now why this is important, and I know it could be a little touchy, but when you think about that, you know what I'm saying? When you think about that, I'm gonna bring that up again. This is some hot stuff right here. Let me bring that up again. Okay, so let's go back all the way down to 750. 1 trillion people at 750 AD from someone who was born in 1950. He has 1 trillion direct ancestors, not aunts and uncles, but direct ancestors by the time we get to 750 AD. We're not even going back to 1 CE, but we do know that the first symbol of the church was Pisces. It was 2 fishes. So Jesus was a Piscean god. This means that everyone who's living now, going into the age of Aquarius, is related to everyone who lived in the age of Pisces. And that's how ages evolve. People don't know that, but people say, yeah, this age, and we're moving on to a new age. And they don't know what it means. What it means is that you're related to everybody directly. Alexander, all them dudes are your direct ancestors. You just have to find the canal that you connect to them. You know what I'm saying? So now when you have these conversations, quote unquote, Afrocentristic conversations, and they say like, yeah, man, the Greeks, they came over and did that to the Egyptians. Well, guess what? You're related to the Egyptians and the Greeks. You see what I'm saying? And so this is so everything before that. So that means that since everybody came out of that, they're somewhat related. Now let me just say this before we continue further. There is a science of how DNA meshes up into that. Like some statements have said that, as you go further back, the percentage of DNA gets a little bit more less and less. For example, you have 2 parents. Everyone has 2 parents, right? So you only get 50% DNA from each parent. And that's why sometimes they say that you should test different family members, because your siblings or whatever, because they may get a different DNA. I've seen situations like, for example, like I was fortunate enough to have my father's DNA. You know, he's still alive, but you know, he's getting old, and I was like, you know, let me get this dude's DNA, because my mother, she died at a younger age. She passed at a younger age, and I wasn't able to get it, and it would have been very valuable because her background was very amalgamated, if you understand what I'm saying. So with my dad, his background is very amalgamated. Also, I think most people living in this hemisphere, that their background is very much amalgamated, right? So I was like, man, I'm glad I got his DNA test done or whatever. And there's controversy around DNA tests. I don't care, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm not about doing anything trite or whatever. So when I did get his DNA test, I discovered that there were a lot of people that he was related to, that didn't show up as related to me. Of course, I'm related to him. If he's related to him, I'm related to him also. But they just didn't show up. Why? Because I only got 50% of his DNA. You know, so when you go further back, the grandparents you have 25% of it. It goes back like that. So some people have said, well, you know, I don't know if that's a real deal, but you know, it's still a direct ancestor. All those people at the time, all the Greeks, like when some of the Afrocentristic circles come in, the Greeks did da whatever, and it's like, yo, those are your ancestors too. Direct ancestors probably is equally amount in blood as these other people. You see what I'm saying? And so that clears up a lot of stuff. Number one, it clears up the fact that the biblical God is not the God that created everything. In our teachings, gods don't create the universe. You know what I'm saying? Life creates the universe. You know what I'm saying? Gods are part of principles of life. Okay, that's very important. Okay, but gods don't create the universe, because this dude in the Bible, he's talking about pulling Israel to the side and then finally letting the Gentiles in at a certain period of time. But if he knew the ancestral scale, he would have already had knowledge of that. You see what I'm saying? So we know that that dude, and I'm gonna do a whole show about that. That's not the creator of the universe, the God of the Bible. That's he's a God, and gods are above demons, but they're not. They're not. You know what how people use the term. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, it's very interesting. But why I'm bringing this out, you know, as far as the ancestral thing is because a lot of times in a lot of pagan groups and stuff, you see someone talking, he's talking about an Orisha, he's from Ireland and stuff like that. And you looking at the dude, you know, like, man, what's this dude talking about? But at the same time, you know, especially if he's born in this hemisphere, you know what I'm saying? He has a right to what's here. Okay, he has a right to what's here. Okay, and so if he's born here and those traditions exist here, those are gods in the land that he was born in. The land that he was born in is his womb. He can have access to those things. You see what I'm saying? We don't want to bring colonialist views, because that's ignorance, into occult science. And even though those things, those colonial views are still lingering, they have no place in occult science, right? Because here's something to think about. One of my mentors was a Nigerian priest. He was a Nigerian priest of Shango. And this dude, he was nice. You know what I'm saying? You go to his house like at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you might have left at 9 p.m. because of the line of people that were coming to see him. I mean, he had people, cops. There were certain restaurants in New York City that were famous that would give him thousands of dollars to ensure the prosperity of their business, all this crazy stuff. And I would visit him, and he would sit there and tell me a lot of his experiences and stuff like that. And, you know, he showed me a lot of different stuff or whatever. It wasn't my path, what he was undergoing, but you know what? It was part of the training, because I learned a lot, you know. So anyway, he told me like that his father, he could stick his hand in water, in cold water, and in 30 seconds it would be boiling. But he said when you cross the Atlantic, he said, like the stuff that they do in Africa, they can't do in America. And he couldn't understand why. You know what I'm saying? And for a long time, I couldn't understand why. Now I understand why. Because it's not the element here. You see what I'm saying? It's not the element. You know what I mean? So a lot of times, yeah, of course, people want to take stuff from overseas. Here's the thing that's very important. And it gets into, like I was going to mention, the worship of Santa Muerte or native gods here. In order for you to gain a certain level of evolution, right? If you're going to work with deities, you have to go through the gateway of working with the homeland deities to connect to other ones. So your watcher is always in this land. It's never outside somewhere else. Wherever you was born, that's where your watcher is from. It's from those pool of deities. I don't care if you're working with Inanna, Ishtar, all this kind of stuff. And that's why a lot of stuff that goes on in other continents can't happen here when they cross the Atlantic, because it's ruled by another force. It's like if you go to England, you can't do the same things that you do in America because it's ruled by a different government. So here is another government, right? Now, this brings up a lot of questions because first, we have the Haitian experience. This was where, magic evolved to a whole other level. Some people say, hey, man, I hear what you're saying. But, in Haiti, man, they're doing stuff that's even unheard of in some parts of Africa and whatever. Here's the thing with all of that. Haiti is part of the mountains of Meshu. So if you know the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's a place where the sun sets and the sun rises, and it was guarded by the Scorpion Man. Okay. To make a long story short, the Bermuda Triangle, is the gateway above Haiti. You know what I'm saying? Now, on the east, where the sun rises, it's the Devil's Triangle a little bit off the coast of Japan. Horizontally, it's a perfect match. It's a straight line. So if you know where Suma was, is actually equal distance to Haiti and the Bermuda Triangle, and it's equal distance. That same distance is stretched between Sumer, Mesopotamia, and the Devil's Triangle in Japan. It's absolutely amazing when you realize it. But see, the problem is that people, they don't understand that these sciences came from an umbrella of one world science. And you got to think, when you go someplace, you go to Greece, 7 upper gods, 9 lower gods. You go everywhere, it's the same numbers. But then they want to say like, oh, that's different than this. And it's the same thing. So that means it was one world science, that heavily relied upon ancestor worship. And you can't separate it. When you in the beginning, you can kind of look at it like, yeah, man, this is my thing because my ancestors died or whatever. But when you really get into it, it's not separate. And if you do that, it's going to limit you. You see what I'm saying? And that's why you can't have a colonialist paradigm, because it's limiting you spiritually. You know what paradigm is not limited by colonialism? There's a lot of paradigms that are limited, even religions. Islam, they're limited to Mecca. They're limited. They place the limitation on them to Mecca, right? And I'm saying that for a reason. Okay, even though Islam is a fast-growing religion, it's limited to Mecca. You see what I'm saying? And so that's its center, right? Okay. Judaism, same thing. It's limited to Israel. The homeland is Israel, whatever. Okay. Originally in occult science, the promised land was achieving zodiac consciousness, because you're not in the ladder of the planets banging up against each other. How can you have peace if you can't escape a malevolent fate from a planetary aspect? How could you have peace? You see what I'm saying? You can never have peace. So the Chaldeans knew a long time ago, nah, man, we got to get up this ladder. We got to go around this way. And so you have a lot of industries like Hollywood and stuff. They'll go on and say, he's a star. And people don't even realize that they're saying like, yo, this dude made it. He made it to the zodiac. You see what I'm saying? And that's what that originally meant. Okay. So, but here's one organization that has perpetrated a lot. You know what I'm saying? And it's a little controversial, but I get it. The Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not limited to colonialism. Their promised land is all over the world. South America, Africa, everywhere. And here's something amazing about, and why I'm bringing this up. It's because when you understand the structure of the Catholic Church, the Vatican is just a generator. It's a generator to generate, to simulate exactly what the heavens is doing. The Catholic Church is the only religion. I mean, there's other groups that have tried and studied Kemetic sciences. I'm not knocking that, but as far as like the world front, I mean, we minus the child molestation. The Catholic Church is and I'm not even Catholic, is the exact replication of the religion of Egypt. Is the exact replication of it. And so here's the thing, why the Vatican is so powerful is because they don't have that colonialism. But let's take it a step further. Do you realize that the Catholic Church has recorded every saint, every city in the world is ruled by a saint? Every city in the world is ruled by a saint? Okay. Every day of the year is a feast day. Just like in Zulu, we have in our calendar, we have two calendars now. We have a Necronomicon calendar, we have the Nigerian calendar, but the Nigerian calendar, every day is ruled by a kami. That's very important because when things happen, you can see its relationship with that ruling energy, which is what the case was in Egypt. They had a 360-day calendar, and each day was ruled by a distinct deity, not like now we have 7 days in a week, so we could say, hey, Venus rules, but no, if there were 360 days, there were 360 deities. And if you don't believe me, you could check the history of the Kaaba stone in Mecca. That's when Mecca was powerful, when they had 360 idols, because those idols each represented a day. You know what I'm saying? And from that, they can tell exactly what deity needs to be appropriated because of what happened on that day. So same thing with the Catholic Church. They have a saint for every city you go to in the world. I'm not talking about like America and just the Vatican or Europe or Spain or something. Every single city in the world is ruled by a saint. And that saint also aligns with a star. And based on that information, when something happens, they know exactly what's going on in heaven. Every single mass shooting, we had 300 mass shootings before COVID. I mean, every year this dude was in office, we had more mass shootings than there was days in the year. And guess what? All those mass shootings in America could be traced to an astrological malefic aspect that was also represented by a saint's disapproval. That's how deep it is. So they're not colonial. I'm saying they're not under colonial rule. You see what I'm saying? So they don't take them ideas. They may impose them. I mean, they say publicly, hey, we don't believe in that or whatever. But, I mean, history has some things to play, whatever, in all of that. And there's a reason for that also, which we'll get into in another video, which is vicious. But if you're going to step away from that organization, and a lot of people in occult science, they criticize the Catholic Church and stuff, well, you better have your guns up to understand the level of science that you need to learn. And so you need to leave that, well, I don't know if this person is died out, whatever. So when it comes to Santa Muerte, for example, or some other energies that are native to America, it doesn't have to be only Santa Muerte, it could be there are a lot of native energies in the Cherokee Nation, and a lot of different nations in the Seminole Nation, and some of the free people of color nations and hoodoo and stuff like that. There's a lot of native energies, right? But you need to have one of them as a watcher to connect whatever tradition you want to around the world. You see what I'm saying? The Catholic Church, because they're using Jesus, which was the ancestor, as we understand now, of everyone who succeeded the age of Pisces. He's an exact personification of that. So we understand their source of power, and it's linked into the sun. So we get it. But if you're going to work a different way, make sure that, and I don't care, it doesn't have to be America, but whatever land you're dealing with, that you pay respects to those who are in government of that land. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people may remember there was an article that I wrote, and I mean, I consider, I mean, I wrote a lot of articles, you know what I'm saying? I probably written like somewhere near 5,000 to 8,000 articles, you know what I'm saying, in a short period of time on the news page, the blog, website, whatever people want to call it. And one of the articles, there was only one article that showed me the power of media. I mean, there's a lot of things I wrote about the Necronomicon, a lot of music reviews and stuff, but there was one specific article that showed me the power of media. And that article was Batman, the Mayan God. That was an article that I wrote probably like around 2011. And how I came up, and I'm saying this for a reason, and how I came across the article was, I was like, at the time I had I had a roommate or whatever, and he was into comic book lore. And one day I came home and I had read an article by a mystic. I can't remember his name off the top. It's from South America too. And he was talking about this bat god, Kamazos, and how he would reside in the cave and all this crazy stuff. And I was like, man, that's interesting. But it didn't really sink because, I had read it, but I was also busy doing a couple of other things. So the next day I came in and my roommate said, hey, you want to check this out? Because, sometimes I would check out some of the episodes with him, we'll talk or whatever. And I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, yo, this is the exact same thing I read from this dude about this Mayan bat god. And they're talking about Bruce Wayne and all this crazy stuff. And he goes into the cave in the same manner, but it just wasn't going into the cave. He made a petition or something that was identical to the Lord. So I started researching this bat god. And I was like, man, this is amazing. So I wrote an article about it. Okay. The article was probably one of the most popularly read articles I've written. But because I laid the references and facts out there, within 3 months, someone had came out with a bat suit that cost $250,000 based on the Mayan Batman. That's when I knew the power of media. And then the article, a couple of articles, they reference you like, yeah, Warlock Asylum wrote this, I got it from this website. And then after a while, they're like, nah, they start mimicking it. You know what I'm saying? Like, as if, whatever. That's how some media is. You put the facts out there and someone's going to configure it like their own. That sort of thing happened. But the lesson here is that a lot of times I tell people, when you're dealing with deities, someone's sacrificed to or whatever, and all of a sudden the Catholic Church comes, those energies don't go away. They reinvent themselves in the form of comic book lore. They reinvent themselves in the form of, just different things that we see around us, even logos or whatever, and that's how they survive. You know what I'm saying? And they're able to draw people in, maybe in a slightly different way, but they're able to get the emotional energy that they were getting thousands of years ago. Those energies still rule. You know what I'm saying? Now you're going to come, you born in the land and you're going to bring something else in. That's like bringing a governor from France into New York and telling him like, yo, man, we need to make some changes. What can he do? What can he do really? So what you have to do is if you want that governor of France to come to New York and make some changes, then you better talk to the governor of New York. And, through that governor, he can talk to that governor of France and see what ideas is it that you're trying to implement and then make those changes. So the only energies that work on behalf of people who are born in America are the energies that rule America. You know what I'm saying? Now, speaking on DNA, there are some, I have heard some serious exceptions. And it depends on the tradition and the rite. For example, there was a lady who is Ashkenazi, from Ashkenazi Jewish descent. And I have to say it like that because Judaism is a religion and there's different lineages of Judaism. So to say someone is just Jewish and I'm supposed to cast a picture in your mind, that's a little bit insulting. So she was Ashkenazi Jewish person, and she went to Haiti and she wanted to get down with the Voodoo. And the guy who was initiating her, he had to do some research. He had to look back into her lineage. And he looked back into the lineage and he was like, he got caught up in one of the realms. And basically he told her, he said, are you sure you want to do this? Because he had to negotiate with her ancestors to bring her over. You see what I'm saying? So that was interesting, but she came over. You know what I'm saying? She was able to come over. And there's other situations that I've heard like that. But in either case, respect should be taken into consideration of the homeland deities. A lot of times people say homeland deities and they're just thinking of how they look and the people who look like them, what they're dealing with and stuff like that. And then another time you got people who look at you and they think like, what I mean? Like, oh man, this dude, he doesn't know what he's dealing with, and why is he pimping our culture and all this kind of stuff. He got a Mexican hat on, not even knowing that some of my people came out of Mexico, some of my people came out a couple of places. You know what I'm saying? And so, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm culturally, etiquette. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't raised in the culture, but yeah, I got ancestors from different places. You know what I'm saying? And that should be respected, because a lot of times, and I know how people get down, you know what I'm saying? A lot of times people look at a person, oh man, you still whatever you are, like you Irish. I knew an Irish brother. He was in the Necronomicon deeply, and he's moved on to other things. But he's a good brother, you know what I'm saying? If you saw him, you wouldn't even think that his grandfather was Haitian. You know what I'm saying? And, he's been able to explore those traditions, but he manifests as an Irish individual. So you can't get online and say some crazy stuff unless you know a person. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, you sounding like like a racist. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the thing. I've heard of people who may have went to Wiccan circles and, they could have been like African American people and stuff, and people like, hey man, why don't you explore, some ATR traditions. Maybe they want to explore their European side. Maybe they have a European side. They might have it more than the head witch who's running the coven. And then you telling them to go into some some stuff that, is not their choice because of how they look. Not even knowing that they're ancestry. Because of your colonialist views, you're trying to imbue into the occult world. You know what I'm saying? And the only thing that's going to do is just limit your own stuff and segue into, energies that don't need to be present. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to kind of touch on that to kind of really bring things to the reality of what they are. You see what I'm saying? There's a lot more stuff that we'll talk about in depth with all of this, because it's a pretty deep paradigm, a pretty deep rabbit hole. But, those are some of the examples that I want to give in discussing the importance of DNA. Now, DNA in itself as a science, in conjunction with occult science, pretty much branches into what Simon says has a lot to do with raising the Kundalini. And once you raise that Kundalini, the star sense of that is within all parts of the universe. That's when the universe unveils itself. So there's no way that you could raise your Kundalini and believe in some colonialist stuff. You see what I'm saying? Because you can see the connections between everybody. You see what I'm saying? And that doesn't mean that, let's take this a little bit deeper, right? Gurdjieff had said that what limits a person is their zodiac sign, culture, and like I forgot, he said something else too. And I didn't understand what he was talking about at the time. Like some parts I understood, but what was this guy really talking about? Basically, culture, people say culture is very important. Ancestors are very important, this sort of thing. and they are, ancestors were the first deities, you know what I'm saying? So if you look at, a deity like Santa Marta, she's an ancestor to many people, you know what I'm saying? Um, that sort of thing. And it doesn't matter the form. There could be people related to her physically who could take on any form. Same thing like with Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, you find a dude in England related to him, all this crazy stuff. So in terms of the, these ideas and things of that nature, it's very important that we take into consideration exactly what we're saying, and how we get to certain understandings and stuff. But what I was going to say was that culture is very, very important. It's extremely important in a lot of different ways. But what it really is the fabric of how the subconscious mind works. And how do I know this? Like, people who know me, I study a lot of things, you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of times I'm trying to find ancestral trails. And I did a lot in Asian studies. And I know, like, a lot of times there was another brother who was coming into me, coming with me into these communities. I haven't heard from him in a while, but, he used to give me a ride sometimes, or whatever. We used to talk about a lot of different stuff and had some things in common. So I would notice that after we would do certain rituals, some of them were Buddhist rituals or whatever, and you're in the area, you go to a deli, that deli happens to be, maybe a Korean deli, maybe a Japanese deli, and we're doing rituals relative to those cultures. And the people would treat us like one of their own, maybe never met us. They would do certain things that, like, for example, my friend, he was like this big dude, he was a big dude, and and I'm a pretty good sized person myself. And so, we go into a deli, whatever. In normal times, people see two Black people, whatever. They're like, oh man, let's put the cash away, whatever. So we come in after this Buddhist ritual, and this dude, when he sees us, he doesn't do anything strange. He just pulls out a knot of cash behind the counter and starts counting the money on the counter in front of us and making jokes. You know what I'm saying? At first it was like, but the energy, I could feel the energy still riding off the ritual. So what I mean to say is that whatever we were doing affected the fabric of his subconscious, because he recognized us culturally, even though we may look different. You see what I'm saying? And so it's the same thing. Like, when you go into, if you'll find that when you work with certain pantheons that have distinguished cultures backing them up, you find yourself in sync with the people of those cultures, because you're working through the fabric of how their subconscious mind is woven. It's woven the same way everybody else is, to a point. However, there are certain aesthetics that work as triggers for their subconscious mind. So when you're studying tradition, it could never be higher, right? It can never be higher. It could only be within the fabric of that culture, but it could take you to high places. But if a person equally implement themselves in a different culture, it could take them to high places. And, we also have to consider that the backbone of a lot of these cultures, African or whatever we want to call it, a lot of them is India. You know what I'm saying? A lot of cultures come out of India because Buddhism was an Indian religion. You know what I'm saying? And so, that's one element. And then the Hinduism. You know what I'm saying? So you look at Buddhism affects it affects a lot of different nations. You know what I'm saying? So these are some things to consider, but definitely we don't want to have the attitude that, we don't want to bring this colonial thinking into our structure. And so DNA is important in our spiritual transformation, as well as our ancestors. We can call upon them because they need that work. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want to slight that conversation. Ancestors need that work. Why do they need that work? Because that's how they gain merit in the spiritual world. And if you notice that people don't venerate their ancestors, they don't have any success in life. You know what I'm saying? They don't have any success in life. You don't have to venerate your ancestors by building an altar. You can venerate them by just holding down to honoring their name, honoring the name that you come in. You know what I'm saying? But if you're going to go into like the hidden science of ancestor veneration, they need that work. They need work, you know what I'm saying? Because that's how they gain merit in the spiritual world, and that's how they move up the ladder. Just like, yeah, when they pass, you have a wake. You know, that comes from the word wake up, get up. You know, get up, wake up, wake up. So when, you know, a relative pass, you have a wake. That means that they're being born in the spiritual world. You see what I'm saying? They're waking up. And so people gather, you know, to push that baby through that spiritual embryo. The day of death is the day of birth in the spiritual world. So that's how that works. Now, after a while, that person gains more strength and stuff. They can help individuals that they cared about during their earthly life. But in order for them to do that, you have to put them to work. You know what I'm saying? And that's agreed upon in those worlds. You know what I'm saying? So we know that there are certain covenants, like when we study about Kerr, different things of that nature. So when you're working with these energies, you definitely want to know what realm they come from, you know, and the worlds that they attend to, you know what I'm saying? And as in ancestor worship, you know, a lot of people wonder, man, how the chthonic deities, you know, why people worship chthonic deities? Because they look dark, you know what I'm saying? All this crazy stuff. And a lot of it is because they rule the ancestral realms. You see what I'm saying? And so, you know, even if you look at Christianity, which has a strong European foundation, you know, its greatest symbol is a crucifix. You know what I'm saying? That's an underworld symbol, I would think. It's a symbol of death. And then people turn around, you know what's going on with Santa Marta, and the majority of the world is looking at somebody dying on a cross. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, but basically the reason why is because it rules the ancestral realm. Jesus Christ, ultimately, even though we talked about the personification of that whole era's ancestry, right? But really what he represents, because he was a king priest like Melchizedek, who was a Sumerian or came out of Mesopotamia, he represents the paradigm of that existed in Sumer, where the kings of Sumer in the afterlife became mediators. I think they were mediators when they were alive, but they definitely worked as mediators between gods and men. And so that's what he represents. It's the same thing of the meaning of the word Bandar. It's just personified in one individual. You see what I'm saying? So that's why they ruled the ancestral realm. They didn't rule the starry realm. And that's brought out in the Atlantean Necronomicon, but it's also brought out in a book called Spiritism and the Cult of the Dead. If you give me a second, I can actually pull up the reference for you. I don't want to give too much off the mouth, because sometimes people who are watching these videos for the first time, they may not, you know, they just may not get it, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, they need references and stuff, and rightly so. You know, I just want to be up here saying anything, you know what I mean? So let me take a look. I have it in the archives. Let me see. Okay, I think I do have it. I think it's on the other page. It's not on. There was a book I wrote that's actually out of print. It's the only book that actually was rejected by the copyright office because they just didn't like the content. And it was called The Genealogy of God. I guess the woman who was proofing this thing was a Christian, so it was a little bit weird or whatever. But let me take a look through this. Give me 1 second. I'll tell you an interesting story. So, you know, I've been building up on the equipment, you know what I mean? Got the green screen and everything. And, you know, and my mom talking to Santa Marta, you know, like, man, you know, energy is great or whatever. And then, you know, I got the green screen and everything going, you know, I got the umbrella lights and all of that. I'm like, man, this is crazy. And then I'm loading backgrounds up and I'm like, okay, this background looks good. This background looks good. This background looks good. And all the backgrounds, like house type backgrounds or whatever, right? Because it's about the message, the energy. So all of a sudden, I delete the backgrounds because this ain't what I want. You know what I'm saying? Then I start looking for more backgrounds, the like virtual backgrounds to use. And then none of them loaded up. I said, yo, I can't load a JPEG. And I felt this energy, like just pure heat. This is just before this video, pure heat coming out in my back. And I said, took a deep breath. And I said, you know what? A Santa Marta background, that's gonna work. Sure enough, I found a Santa Marta background and that thing load right up. And that's this what it is, man. That's just what it is, man. Gotta rock a Mexican hat, B. Gotta rock it out. So let me check this out and see if I can get this up here. I thought y'all might find that interesting. Let me see. Okay, yes, it is here. So I'm definitely going to share this right here. So let me go on back into where I can share the screen, and I think you're going to love this because you can kind of see that the ancestral realm is ruled by death deities. It's not ruled by like Zeus and stuff like that. I mean, like, deities that don't deal with the underworld. And that's why Ishtar had to gain power in the same way the story of Jesus Christ. She was crucified long before Christ was, the story of Christ being crucified. She was crucified. And, that was important so that she could hold sway over that world. You see what I'm saying? And so when you read the Simon Necronomicon and it says that, you keep walking and you sacrifice, yourself to God and it's pleasing, you're basically saying that you're taking the same role as Ishtar. You know what I'm saying? You go into the underworld and you allow your ego to die. You know what I'm saying? And that's what's pleasing. You know what I'm saying? Because you're sacrificing your animal self. You're sacrificing, these things. And through that sacrifice, the DNA is changed, okay? And that allows you segue to rule over the ancestral realm. Yes, there's a lot of dark aesthetics. There's a lot of aesthetics like, man, what's this talking about? But if you know anything about the human body, we know that the skeletal system is representative of the planet Saturn, which is in the planetary realm, the tip of the ladder of lights. You want to go on to the zodiac realm, which is the true promised land, the land of milk and honey. That's the zodiac realm. But, you still kind of doing it from the Saturnian land because Ninurta, in general Mesopotamian mythology, he's noted a lot of times as being a solar deity in some aspects, even though he's representative Saturn, but he was kind of half in and half out the underworld, right? And so that's why a lot of depictions, a lot of representations also equal that, So anyway, I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna get into the Cult of the Dead, and then we're gonna shut it down because this is a long video, B. Okay, and this is on the Art of Nzul blog page. Here's an excerpt right here. It says, scholars are aware that the oldest religious remains are those of ancestral cults. Okay, in ancestor worship, commonly called the Cult of the Dead, it's believed that sacrifice is a tool of empowerment for the newly deceased relative, just like we spoke about the wake. The day of the relative's death or ancestor is their birthday in the spirit world. Family members of the deceased would offer a form of sacrifice that was believed to be useful in empowering their ancestors in the spirit world, much like breastfeeding a newborn child. The more an ancestors matured in strength, the greater their ability to bestow blessings upon their descendants. Published in the mid-1800s, Spiritism and the Cult of the Dead, which is a book that we have in the free books on Nhedwana Library on Warlock Asylum International News. If you go to the page, you will see the Nhedwana Library, and you can get this book free there. You can download the PDF. The book, once again, Spiritism and the Cult of the Dead in Antiquity by Louis Bales Payton, PhD. It's the only book that talks about the cult of the dead, the ancestral worship, right? In the way of labeling it that, okay? And it says that, he wrote this in the 1800s. He said that sacrifice is a rite that has meaning only in the cult of the dead. So let's get it straight. If sacrifice only has meaning in cult of the dead, why he's saying that is because historically, that's what was found. You see what I'm saying? It's not about faith or anything. He's making analysis and stuff. This is historically the archaeology, the remains they found that preceded Christ in his era. You know, this is what was found. So sacrifice is a rite that only has meaning only in the cult of dead. The blood in which the life of the animal resides is poured out in order that the shades may drink of it and renew their vigor. So what was the sacrifice of Jesus Christ about? You see what I'm saying? That's an underworld deity. You see what I'm saying? So offerings of food and drink are not needed by celestial deities. See that? But are needed by spirits of the dead and have been offered to them from earliest times, and afterward was extended to other divinities. So originally, those divinities wasn't getting sacrifice. Those were ancestral deities. And I keep talking about this, but I do have information about Nimrod being Yahweh. Actually, you know what? It might actually be in this article. Let me just check for a second. I don't think it is, but if it is, I'm gonna blow it up now, and then, you know, we'll make a whole, you know, video about it later, because that's very important. But I don't think it's in this one, this article right here. It could be. Okay. All right, let me just take a look here. Okay. All right. It actually does get a lot into Nimrod in this article, so it's really good to read. It talks about how Nimrod was Melchizedek. If you don't know that, then you definitely want to read this article. I'll put it in the description because it's very, very important. Let me see if I could find it. I think we're getting pretty close to verifying that Nimrod was Yahweh. I think we're close to verifying that. Let me see. No, it's not in this one. Okay. But what you will find that's interesting is what early scholars thought about Nimrod and Buddha. And let's just make a whole video about Nimrod and the Simon Tome and stuff like that. I think that would be great. Why I'm saying that is because, you know, now that we know that a lot of these deities were people's ancestors, and it was believed that when they went to the ancestral realm, they gained quite a bit of power just from even going to the ancestral realm, let alone sacrifice. So most of those deities, all of them that took sacrifice, were deities of the underworld. You see what I'm saying? So recently, like last week, Brett Watts had asked, like, hey, man, you know, how do we deal with certain things? Because, you know, the underworld thing is serious, and you look at out in the world, and that's why humanity is the way it is, because these deities are being worshipped, but they're not being sacrificed to. And I'm not talking about human sacrifice. That's disgusting. They don't even want that. But in somebody's twisted mind, they're thinking, hey, I can get more power if I just kill someone and bring it to a deity. That's not what's going on. And I'm going to say that because, not because I'm on camera, because it's real. You know what I'm saying? you have to consider that deities all live by the same divine code. We know this from the sleep of Ishtar, from Ishtar's descent, Ananna's descent to the underworld. They live by the same code. Enki was able to pull something out, you know what I'm saying? But ultimately, that was also a lesson in itself. But how Erishkigal ruled her realm was the same way how Anu ruled his realm. So people think like, you know, man, I can get away with this and da-da-da, whatever. And sometimes the chthonic world does deal with certain type of emotions that are associated, when you really understand it, with the Kundalini rising. You see what I'm saying? But certain sacrifices appropriate to the dead, of course, are things like tobacco, alcohol, things of that nature, because there's certain reasons why. Because of the molecular structure. The world of the dead sits close to the physical realm. And so a lot of things that are burned, it can reach them because of the molecular transformation. So burning bread, the molecular transformation, cigar smoke, the molecular transformation, the vapor, it's all in the same deal. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, that's a given. But when you really kind of understand some of the associations, they sort of break off from the decay, but the uprising of the Kundalini also. You see what I'm saying? And that's what's not given. Their job is to tear away, to pull away. So in essence, you want to make sure that you're balanced, because you live in a world where there's day and night. You know what I'm saying? So you want to make sure that you're balanced. You want to set yourself up in a balanced way. And a lot of times those energies have solar and you know, nocturnal aspects. You know, so it's very, very, very kind of interesting. I think that when you look at the growing number of people involved with Santa Muerte, one thing about it is that it represents traditionally how rites were practiced, because traditionally a person was devoted in ancient times to one deity, and they may have worked through the pantheon with saying like, look, I'm a devotee. Like you look at Enheduanna, she was devoted to Nana, and then she was later, she started working towards the energy of Inanna. But basically, she would pray to other deities, of course, but her main obligation was to this deity. A person wasn't just devoted to seven; they were married to one. You see what I'm saying? And so that's very important. And today, you know, it's a blessing that we can see such progression with things. It's unfortunate that some people take certain rights like that into their own hands and their own understanding and never really fully appreciate what it's for. But virtue, anytime that you're dealing with a deity, I don't care if it's upper or lower, virtue is important, because that's truly what's going to protect you. You see what I'm saying? So I want to end it here. It's been wonderful talking to y'all, and we'll be back shortly. This is me, Sal Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, and I want to thank everybody for giving the listening ear, and you know, we'll talk soon. Make sure you subscribe and leave some comments in the comment section. Peace.